Welcome back. We've heard, some good, some bad information this morning about the state of money in elections and what we can do about it. And this afternoon, we're going to talk about, what's working and how these models can be spread. And as we've heard a lot today, we know that from our research in New York City and the research of others about the New York City program, that the New York City small dollar matching funds program is working in New York City. It's working to encourage small contributions, it's working to encourage new contributors, and it's working to encourage competitive elections. Today we're going to talk about, this panel is going to talk about how we get the return of small donor public financing at the ballot box. And we have a really interesting group of panelists. And in case anyone was worried that it was just all talk, that this is a issue that goes across the political spectrum, we have a group of panelists of 3 elected officials, 2 of whom are Republicans and 1 of whom is a Democrat. So there's definitely an issue that people across the political spectrum care about. First, though, we're going to hear from Professor John Mollenkopf, who is the director of the Center for Urban Research and a distinguished professor of political science and sociology at the CUNY Graduate Center, where he studies urban politics and policy. He's currently analyzing the impact of immigration on electoral politics in New York City, and he's going to have some interesting things to talk about how the New York City program works on voting and the distribution of contributors in New York City. After Professor Mollenkopf, we'll hear from New York City Public Advocate Letitia James. For those of you who don't know, the Public Advocate is the 2nd highest elected office in New York City. Tish is the first woman of color to hold a citywide position in New York City. She served in the City Council from 2004 to 2013, and is a 5-time participant in our Matching Funds program. We also have City Council member Eric Ulrich, who represents New York's 32nd Council District in Queens. He was first elected in a special election in 2009 at age 24. He won re-election to the council later that same year and again in 2013. He has participated in the New York City Campaign Finance Program in each of his 3 campaigns for city office. Finally, we have former Congressman Tom Petri, who served Wisconsin's 6th district from 1979 to 2015. He has a lot to say about the way money works in federal campaigning, and right now, among other active roles after he's been in Congress, he's a member of the advisory board of Issue One, which is a nonpartisan organization that works to get money out of politics. I'm eager to start our panel. All of our panelists have really interesting perspectives on the intersection between money, politics, and voters. And with that, I'll turn to Professor Mollenkopf.
Amy, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and to participate in this wonderful set of conversations about this really important topic for the future of our democracy in New York City and the country as a whole. I'm going to say a few things about the trends that are indicated in this lovely set of tables that I hope you picked up outside. If you didn't, there's still a few more left out there. And I'm going to talk first about the trends in the electorate. Then I'm going to say a little bit about what we know about who's giving to public, who's making the public contributions that are being matched by the CFB system. And then I'm going to conclude with a few, hopefully slightly iconoclastic thoughts about how we might improve the system. So the first thing to know is that New York City, unlike, say, Cleveland or St. Louis, is a growing city and increasingly immigrant and minority city. So, and the immigrants are gradually getting naturalized. So the potential electorate of the city is large, it's diverse, and it's been growing. And partly in reflection of that, the voter registration list has also been growing, although it tends to fluctuate because at certain points during certain elections, people who have left the city or died are removed from the rolls, and of course new people are added all the time. And at a couple of points, both in 2000 and more recently, we can compare the voter registration list with the eligible population and see that, yes, we have a pretty good registration list, more or less about 80%, but there's still about 1 million people who are citizens of voting age in New York City, for whatever reason, have declined to register. So we still have a ways to go in terms of making the eligible electorate match the theoretically potential electorate. If you go down to the rows below, it shows both the general election votes and primary election vote, Democratic primary election votes in a number of different elections, especially the municipal elections, which are in the off years of 01, 05, 09, and 13. And there you see a somewhat different trend. And except for the Obama election in 2008, where there was an upward spike in turnout to the recent high point of 62.5%, even in presidential elections, which are the ones that draw the most voters out to the polls, there's been a gradual downward drift. And you can see that also in the state elections for governor, which are 2002, 6, 10, and 14, and even more so for the municipal elections. And in the 2013 municipal election, the turnout in terms of ratio of voters to the voter registration list was only a quarter. And if you look at the Democratic primary, the turnout rates are even lower, with even though the 2013 election was open and competitive and no incumbent was dominating the scene, the turnout was larger than some of the previous primaries, but it didn't match the very important primary that took place in 2001, right after the 9/11 attacks, which was a pivotal moment for the city. Now, we can look at this and say that's not a very good record in terms of political mobilization and engagement. And all I can say in the defense of the city, I can say two things. One is that turnout is correlated with, or negatively correlated with, a lot of things that are concentrated in New York City. So homeowners are more likely to vote than people who are renters, and we have a lot of renters. People who were in low-income families are less likely to vote than people in high-income families. Immigrants are far less likely to vote than the native-born, and so forth. So we know we have a lot of obstacles to overcome to truly mobilizing everyone. But we also do better than, if you think this is bad, you could go to Los Angeles. We heard earlier about the 9% turnout in an important referendum measure there previously. And in general, LA's turnout rates, even controlling for various demographic factors, are not as good as ours. And in many other cities have rates down at this low level. I've been spending a lot of time digging into the voter registration list, the voter history list, matching how people vote in general elections and primary elections, and looking at the broad sweep of history from 2000 to the present. So I have 14, going on 15 years worth of experience. And I've discovered a couple of interesting things. One is that many, many voters only vote in general elections, and they don't vote in primaries. And they tend to vote, most likely to vote, in presidential general elections. And from a political science point of view, that's a little odd, because everybody knows the state of New York is going to go to the Democrats, and a vote cast in a general election in New York City is usually not a very important one. Nothing much in the large scheme of things turns on that. And the critical votes are in the primaries, where in a city with 70% Democratic registration, the Democratic nominee is likely to win, except in mayoral races, as we've seen over the years. And so people really ought to be motivated to vote in the primaries rather than the general election, but they don't. And People in politics often talk about prime voters, the idea that there's a core of people who vote all the time. You can count on them to vote. And most of the rest of the population is not really paying attention. So let's go look for the prime voters and mobilize them. But if you look at the actual empirical record, there aren't really very many prime voters among Democrats of people who've bothered to vote in at least one election who vote in all of them. It's a very episodic sort of thing. On the current voter registration list, only, let me get the right point in my notes here. Yes, well, among all Democrats who voted in at least one general election from 2000 to the present, 42% have never voted in a Democratic primary. And then if you look at the people who do vote in Democratic primaries, if of those who were registered since 2000 and thus had the opportunity to vote in all of the 12 general elections and of all the voters who registered from 2000 to the present, fewer than 20% voted in 10 or more of those 12 elections. And 14.7% on the voter registration list today have never voted in any election in New York City. So that 4.2 million people, we automatically need to deduct about 1/8 of them from the list because for whatever reason they've never engaged the political process. And then looking at the Democrats in this group that has been registered for a long time, who could have voted in 15 different primaries, only 6.6% of them had voted in 10 of those 15 primaries, while 35.9%, as mentioned before, hadn't voted in any of the primaries. So this paints a picture of a relatively small electorate that's episodically engaged, way too small an electorate really considering the important issues that are in front of the city regularly, and that whether you're talking about an election after the attacks of September 11th that are going to set the future of the city, or this last mayoral election which changed the direction of the city from a mayor who I guess at last report was worth $35 billion to my neighbor and friend Bill de Blasio, who comes from a very different background. A relatively thin group of people, a relatively small share of people are making these decisions. And as I say, the drift has been downwards, and that's a bit troubling. Okay, let's turn to the question of contributing. And the really positive takeaway here to begin with is that people who contribute are much more likely to vote. Twice as likely in a general sense, and in Democratic primaries 3 times as likely as people who don't contribute. So clearly the act of contributing is an extension of political engagement. It's something that people do on top of bothering to go to the polls. And the fact that we have the very substantial public match, I think, really incentivizes people to contribute, and therefore importantly incentivizes participation in the political process to work against this larger trend that we talked about. But one of the interesting things that we have learned in work between our center and the Campaign Finance Board is that many of the people who are making campaign contributions are not registered voters. This seems odd, doesn't it? And if you look at the table in the lower left-hand side, you can see that more than 1/3 of the contributors are not registered voters or have not voted. So on the one hand, it's great that the people who do contribute are really much more engaged in the political process. But what can we learn? What do we think about the people who are not? And This is a question we haven't really fully answered. We're really beginning to research it. But we can say that the share of contributions from people who are not registered voters tends to be higher particularly in Asian and Latino neighborhoods that have lots and lots of immigrants. So in some sense, probably the contributions are coming from people who cannot vote because they're not yet citizens, but find this alternative path into political participation. And they get a degree of contact with and relationship with elected officials in this pattern that's a little bit different from what develops between candidates and their voting base. Let me share a couple of numbers that go beyond these charts. More than half of the contribution dollars to all mayoral candidates in the 2013 election came from contributors who either weren't registered or who didn't vote in 2013, either primary or general election. And they tended to make bigger contributions on average than the voter contributors did. This breakdown was about the same for Democratic candidate Bill de Blasio's contributions, but it differed from Republican Joe Lhota. Lhota received more like 60% of his funds from people who were voters and only 40% from non-voters. And for de Blasio, 42% of his contributions came from contributors who weren't even registered. When we did some ecological regression analysis to see what factors were correlated with the share of non-registered contributors, it tends to confirm that areas with more foreign-born residents, particularly Asian and Latino immigrant areas, have the higher shares of non-voter contributors. In Queens, for example, which has many such immigrant areas, only 26.6% of the mayoral contributions came from voting contributors, and half of all contribution dollars came from non-registered contributors. The pattern, though, for the council is much different. It's much more spread out. It's much more even. Many more types of neighborhoods were involved in the contribution system. Excuse me. Let me give you one example from a specific council race, District 38, where an incumbent, Sarah Gonzalez, lost to a challenger, Carlos Menchaca, and 62% of Menchaca's dollars came from voters, while barely a quarter of Gonzalez's dollars came from voters. And this, I think, is an example of how public financing does help make such races more competitive. Now, let me conclude by a few thoughts about how to improve the system. Clearly, more competitive races with newcomer candidates or charismatic candidates like President Obama draw more voters into the arena. People vote when they're really interested in who's in the race. And certainly New York City voters are most likely to vote in presidential races, less for governor and even less for mayor. And it suggests that people are focused at the top of the political system and less focused on what's going on in their own particular neighborhood. So how can we make New York City neighborhoods more competitive and more exciting to the people who participate in our elections? There have been a couple of ideas tossed around, and the most prominent one recently was put forward or discussed by Mayor Bloomberg's last Charter Revision Commission, and that's that we move to a nonpartisan system with no party primaries and a runoff when no candidate gets 50% of the vote. And the plus on that is that everybody gets to participate in the key election. If the key election is the Democratic primary, then only Democrats get to have a say in that election and not the independents and Republicans and everyone else. So it has a certain kind of logic to it, that proposal. It sounds appealing. But the fact is that states and localities that have nonpartisan systems like this tend to have even lower turnout levels than we do. Louisiana is a state that's had the system at the state level for a long time, and they have among the lowest turnout levels of any of the states. And the municipalities of California all have nonpartisan elections. And if you systematically compare our elections with those of Los Angeles, bad as our numbers are, we consistently do better. So I don't think this is the answer, in part because parties are really the active agents of voter mobilization. It not only takes an informed and interested electorate, it takes an agent to go out there and ask people to vote, to convince them that it's important, to get them involved. And so as strange as it may seem for a person like me who's a long-time dyed-in-the-wool Democrat, although my grandparents were all Republicans, so I know a little bit about how Republicans think about the world. I think we need a stronger Republican Party in New York City. We need a party that will go out and contest these elections at the local level, at the council level, at every level, with candidates who will give the Democratic incumbents, who often have no opposition, and win re-election on very, very small, thin turnouts. Give them a run for their money. Give everybody a reason to go out there and not just rest on the voters you know will back you and hope that nobody else turns out, but really get people involved in campaign battles. I know this goes against the momentum of party registration, where more people in New York City have refused to select a party than have selected the Republican Party. But maybe we can have a revitalized Republican Party who can turn those tables. And if you don't like that idea, we used to have proportional representation for city council members in New York City. And I think a PR system in which you allocated seats to the boroughs based on their population size and then had proportional representation within the boroughs without districts, but lists of people that were competing with each other, that also might really stimulate people to organize. I spent some time once in Cambridge, Massachusetts that has such a system, and I've seen it in operation. And I know that it actually does work in terms of creating competing lists of people that battle out local elections on the basis of interesting ideas more than we currently have in our current primaries. Let me also say that in looking at the numbers of where contributors and contribution amounts come from, we clearly have a lot of work to deepen the culture of making political contributions in our African American and Latino and immigrant neighborhoods. These groups give far less than the white middle class neighborhoods of New York City. And to the extent that political contributions have weight in the political system, which we all know that they do, we need to democratize the culture of giving to campaigns as well as extend the culture of political participation. Well, some of what I've had to say is a little bit downbeat, but I hope to leave you really on an upbeat idea that New York City is full of very important issues that get battled out in elections. We've had really pivotal contests, especially at various important turning points in our history, like right after 9/11. And so we all have a lot of reason to get out there and widen and deepen political participation in our arena. Thank you.
Do you mind if I stand up?
You're our leader.
Just. People who contribute get the ear of the member and the ear of the staff. They have the access, and access is it. Access is power. Access is clout. That's how this thing works. The completely frank and honest answer is that the method of campaign financing that we currently have has a serious and profound impact not only on the issues that are considered in Congress, but also the outcome of those issues. I've been a part of the system for more than 2 decades and personally raised millions in hard, soft dollars. I know that the endless pressures of raising money threaten the integrity of the legislative process and drain more and more time from my colleagues. These are actual quotes from members of Congress. And I know that I'm here to talk about the local campaign finance system, and we do have a Congress member who will talk about his experience, but the message, quite frankly, is the same. Money, not ideas nor principles, but money reigns supreme in American politics. I want to thank you for having me today. I want to thank our moderator, Amy Loprest, as well as my fellow panelists, Dr. John Mollenkopf, Tom Petri, and one of the recommendations by Dr. Mollenkopf said if we had more Republicans, it would lead to a more robust system. Well, if we had more Republicans like Ulrich, my colleague and my friend, I think I would have a difficult time refuting that. He has a good spirit, and whenever we engage in debates, he doesn't take it personal, and he has a very good heart and a wonderful family, and he comes from a great part of Queens. I also like to thank NYU Law School, the Committee for Economic Development, the Brennan Center for Justice, and Federal Election Commissioner Ann Rabel for making this possible here today. We all lose when money influences elections and our body politic. You see, it was a natural progression for me to enter into politics. As a public interest attorney, I really wanted to affect change on a broader scale. You see, my sheroes were Shirley Chisholm and Barbara Jordan, and I have committed my life to justice, simple, sweet justice. And I came from a hardworking family that believed in God and believed in the country. But we were a humble family, not wealthy, humble. And my father did not want me to enter into politics. In fact, he wanted me to marry a plumber. And that didn't work out. I'm still single. But the fact is I would not be in politics today if it were not for New York City's campaign finance system. I did not have a deep financial infrastructure upon which to draw upon. My friends are not ones I can tap into for big donations. When I first ran for city council, the first time I lost, as most of you know, to then Councilmember James Davis. And as most of you know, Councilmember James Davis was assassinated in City Hall. And I then ran as a third-party candidate on the Working Families line. I heard the applause. Thank you. Thank you very much. And we won. I relied a lot upon working people, just regular working people, who knew about my record, knew about my activism, knew about my resume, and knew about all of my work in the community, particularly representing young people and victims of domestic violence. And without our city's public financing system, I likely would not have succeeded in my campaign for city council or for a public advocate. My campaigns have been unique in that they have relied largely on small donations, and they have mostly been from the borough of Brooklyn, where I was born and raised and where I still live. In the runoff for public election, for public advocate, I didn't have a lot of the big money supporting me. And at times I wondered whether or not I was running against a senator from Brooklyn or the senator from Washington, D.C. My campaign was outspent 3-1, and I did not have any of the mainstream media support me in my efforts. And that's why I was and continue to be abundantly grateful for campaign financing, public financing. Average New Yorkers who believe in the power of grassroots fundraising have been my financial supporters. When ordinary New Yorkers put their hard-earned money into a campaign, they are not just donating their money, but putting their faith into candidates. And that means so much more to me than any big named check. The influence by moneyed interest in our body politic have diminished the voices of working and marginalized communities, and they threaten to undermine our democracy and our economic mobility. States with public financing have higher ratios of women and people of color elected to office. Creating a public financing system will allow even more women and people of color to run for office and allow more people to participate in our election system by helping fund campaigns through small donations. This would mobilize constituents to vote for candidates they feel truly connect to their concerns and political issues they care about. People who donate to elections are 3 times more likely to vote than people who do not. And larger voter turnout yields more accurate election results and ultimately makes our government more effective in representing its people. When the majority of campaign money comes from wealthy donors, then the only needs being represented are those of the wealthy. And when they're concentrated in Manhattan, in only a few zip codes, then all of the voices that are represented in this room and in the city of New York are not being heard. Public financing helps empower ordinary voters with a stronger and more direct opportunity to contribute to elections. Unfortunately, sometimes small donations simply cannot compete. The Supreme Court rulings of McCutcheon and Citizens United have opened the floodgates to unlimited money in our elections. And this is a system where our democracy is up for sale to those with the deepest pockets, hijacked by special interest, powerful special interest, moneyed special interest. And despite our state's reputation as a progressive leader, New York shamefully trails far behind many other states in the number of women elected to office. Women comprise 51% of the American population, but only represent 29% of elected officials at all levels of government. 100 elected officials out of 535 who serve in the Senate and House, only 100 are women. And in New York State, we rank 33rd in the nation for the percentage of women holding seats in the state legislature. In fact, out of 213 seats, only 55 are held by women. 34 in the Assembly and 11 in the State Senate. No other measure except campaign finance can move the needle and directly impact and increase the number of women and people of color. Equality and democracy must be reflected in Congress, in our State House, City Council, in the halls of government. All voices must be heard. All voices must be represented so that we can live in a democracy and we can live in a world where ideas and principles should reign and not money. I thank you for this opportunity.
Well, thank you very much. My name is Eric Ulrich. I'm a Republican member of the City Council. I'm also on the endangered species list. I was elected 6 years ago in a nonpartisan special election. I was only 23 when I ran for City Council, and a week and a half after my 24th birthday, I was elected on February 24th, 2009, to the City Council to represent a district in Queens that most people are familiar with because of Hurricane Sandy out in the Rockaways and Howard Beach and Broad Channel. I want to thank my fellow panelists, especially my good friend Tish James. She is a superb public servant and somebody who really is unafraid to stand up to the special interests and to people that are trying to undo a lot of the good government reforms that we put into place. And I consider her a very dear friend, and I'm honored to be asked to even sit on the dais with such other distinguished panelists today. They wanted me here, I guess, to balance it out so that it wasn't a bunch of progressive Democrats talking about progressive ideas. So I'm, so I'm very happy to be the token Republican. But more importantly, I'm even happier to be here to endorse and to support and to give my full recommendation to anyone who is contemplating running for office, participating in the Campaign Finance Board matching fund program, because if it were not for the CFB, I would have never been elected to the City Council. I was a 23-year-old kid from Ozone Park, for any of those of you who are familiar with Queens. I did not come from a political family. I came from a single-parent household. My mother was a teenage mother when I was born. I've never met my father to this day. We weren't a political family. We didn't come from money. Coincidentally, they were all Democrats. When I grew up and said I was Republican, that created a lot of anxiety in my own family. My grandfather, who was my treasurer, I'll get to that in a minute, was a union steam fitter, local 638. My grandmother worked several jobs, including in the neighborhood laundromat on 101st Avenue, only a few blocks from where my office is now. So I'm very humble in that regard, and I'm not afraid of, I'm not ashamed of where I came from and how I got to where I am, and I'm very cognizant of that. Why was Campaign Finance Board so instrumental in my election? Well, first of all, I was just a kid. That's what people said at the time. But I had a lot of good ideas, and I was from the community, and I thought that I had something meaningful to offer and that I can run for office and make a difference in my community, and I can do it in a nonpartisan way, and that was very helpful, especially when you live in a 3-to-1 Democratic district. People were not able to judge me based upon the party label. They were able to judge me based upon who I was, what I had to say, and why I was running and why I wanted their votes. So once you were able to remove the stigma of being in a party that a lot of people are not particularly crazy about, especially at the time, people said, well, we like this young man. We like what he has to say. Nobody has their hooks in him yet. He doesn't owe anybody anything. I mean, these were some of the things that people, that when I met them on the street or at the subway or at their doorstep, they would say to me that they heard about me. But thanks to Campaign Finance Board, I also purchased a massive billboard on Liberty Avenue on the train station, on the A train in Rockaway Boulevard. That was quite famous. Nobody at that time had ever done anything like that. Matter of fact, I don't even think that you can advertise now on MTA-owned billboards for political campaigns. I think they've done away with that, but that was extremely helpful. Social media was incredibly helpful. The website was incredibly helpful. And the small donations that I was able to solicit from friends and people that I grew up with, and even people who were not interested in politics, but that just wanted, people who just wanted me to succeed. You know, their $50 at the time was matched 4-to-1, and now the incentive is even greater because it's a 6-to-1 match. And that gave me a level playing field, and that allowed me to compete with more seasoned, more established, more well-known candidates who are also running for that seat, and who many people predicted would win. I was not supposed to win, and I won the special election, and then I had to run again that November. And they said, oh, it's just a fluke. He's not going to win. He's just a kid. He's 24 years old. It's a mistake. He wasn't supposed to get it. He's a Republican. He's this. He's that. He doesn't have a, in Howard Beach, I didn't have a vowel at the end of my name. So, and then when you go to Rockaway, he's from the mainland. He's not from the Rockaway. So they had an excuse in every neighborhood why people shouldn't vote for me. But I did not pay attention to the people who said that I couldn't do it. I only surrounded myself with the people who believed in me, who supported me, who wanted me to win, and who wanted me to succeed. And I wasn't distracted by a lot of the people who never wanted me there to begin with. And I think that is incredibly important. But Campaign Finance Board was essential. A few points about participating in the program, though, that I think are critical here, and they cannot be overstated. I mentioned my grandfather, who's since passed on. He had lung cancer, unfortunately. He was my treasurer in every single election that I had run in, and he was my treasurer. Why was he my treasurer? Well, you have to have the right person signing the checks. And I think a lot of people want to hire consultants, and they want to hire their buddy's friend who needs a job, who just got laid off, who was doing banking on the side, or whatever the case may be. You absolutely need someone that you can trust, someone that's going to learn the program, go to the training seminars, communicate on a regular basis with the liaisons that the CSB will assign your campaign. And he did that. He did it so well, by the way, that there were several things that he started in terms of the bookkeeping with my campaign that are now required for anybody running in the program. He was such a stickler. I mean, for me, he was more of a pain in the ass. But whenever I talked to people in the campaign finance board, they said, "Oh, we loved Ronald Kulik. It was wonderful. He was one of the best treasurers. It was a pleasure dealing with him." Of course, he drove me insane for every receipt and every documentation and every note. But you need it. This is because you're dealing with the public's money. It's not your money. It's the taxpayers' money. It's the people's money. And consequently, when the campaigns were over, anything that we didn't use, we returned, because it wasn't my money. It's the city's money. It's the taxpayers' money. In my last reelection, I think I had close to $20,000. And when we paid down all of our liabilities, I went to the bank. I got a bank-certified check. And when I went to CFB, I brought them back this check for close to $20,000. And I think they always look shocked when that happens, because candidates try to spend as much as they can so they don't have to give everything back. But I never abused it in that way, and I never saw it as that. I consider it a privilege that we have this wonderful program. It really is a model for how the state and federal elections should be conducted, in that we were able to compete and send out mail and communicate our message with the voters, and no one could outspend us or outdo us, because if they did, we would just get more money. That is really, really an important part of the Campaign Finance Board program, and it allowed someone like me, just a kid from Ozone Park, to get elected to the City Council 3 times. And I think that sometimes being in office, people become, I don't want to say jaded, but I think they forget what an enormous privilege it really is to sit in a chamber, to sit in a legislature and represent tens of thousands of people and be responsible for in some small way their destinies, the future of their families, their communities. That is not anything that I've ever taken for granted, and I don't think that anybody in public life should ever take that for granted. If they do, then they need to exit public office and go do something else that will give them more meaning and purpose in life. But that's a whole other story for another day. Campaign Finance Board was robust. I think it is something that should be guarded, something that should be enhanced, something that should be expanded. But I know that we talked a little bit about engaging other folks in the political process and in participating in New York City politics. And as much as I'd love to see a stronger Republican Party, I'm not going to hold my breath anytime soon that that's going to happen. I'd like it to see it happen. I think you do need two-party system in every level of government. New York is no exception to that. But I think there are a lot of things that we in this room should be advocating for, such as early voting. One of the reasons why the voting turnout is so low is that we tell people that you can only vote from 6 a.m. to 9 p.m. on a Tuesday in November, and if you don't make it there and you don't have a good excuse in terms of voting on an absentee ballot, you can't vote. You can't be a part of the process, and that is a big problem. I think we ought to have early voting. Other states, even Republican states, have early voting, and so it's not something that we should be afraid of. I think it's something that we should embrace and make it easier for people to vote. We should make it easier for people to register to vote. The fact that nobody has copyrighted or tried to get a hold of the code to develop an app to register to vote just boggles my mind. I'm waiting for one of these good government groups or someone at the Board of Elections at the state or the city to develop an Android and an iPhone app to make it easier for people to register to vote. It can be done because you're allowed to register online through the DMV website, but if you pull up the DMV website, voter registration, it's font size 0.6 because they haven't even come up with a web version of that model. So it's not a very easy thing. If that were the case, imagine how many 18-year-olds we could register in a classroom in seconds. How many teachers in our school system would be able to encourage kids to whip out their phones and and register to vote and teach them about voting and start them. A lot of people don't vote because they're not registered, and they're not registered because we don't make it very easy for people to register to vote. So early voting, making it easier for people to vote, the Campaign Finance Board. Nonpartisan elections I'm a big fan of. I think the fact that we disenfranchise over 1 million voters who are not thrilled with the Democrat or the Republican Party and have decided to enroll as non-party affiliated or in a lesser known party, and they are disenfranchised from the most important elections which do determine who governs the city or governs a particular area, I think is a mistake. If we opened up the political process to those people like they've done in other states, I think that would go a long way towards attracting candidates to run for public office. I also think it would moderate candidates in a sense. I think that the Democratic candidates wouldn't be so concerned with pandering to the extreme left, and the Republicans wouldn't be pandering to the extreme right, because they wouldn't be afraid of angering the people, the Tea Party folks in their party who are really not reflective of the views of mainstream New Yorkers. I think it would do a lot of good that we had candidates who are running and want to govern for all the people, not just a small a particular minority of people who happen to be the base or the most partisan base of their party, the particular party. And the other thing is term limits. I fundamentally support term limits. I think it's a good thing. I think that term limits is something that allows fresh ideas and new people to run. It also piques people's interest in the political process and allows for turnover at various levels of government. Part of the reason why we have so much dysfunction in Albany, in my opinion, is because we don't have term limits, is that we don't have a matching fund program. And as Tish James so eloquently put it, there are only 3 men in a room. And that is part of the problem, too, in that we have this institutional structure that doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon, and it's breeding corruption at our state levels. So Albany, I think, if they had a matching fund program, if they had term limits, if we had early voting, I think we'd see, hundreds of thousands of more people registering to vote, maybe even millions, hundreds of thousands of people engaging in the political process, more people contributing to political campaigns. People would believe in the system again if they thought that there was a chance that someone could get elected that wasn't in somebody else's pocket or beholden to some other special interest, whether it be a corporate interest or a labor interest or some other group. That is the main difficulty that people who are already in public office face, is that when we meet people in the street, they all think that we're crooks because they read these terrible stories about politicians going to jail and taking bribes and cutting deals and doing all these terrible things. People don't believe in the system anymore because the system is broken. And I think that a way to fix the system is to have something like the Campaign Finance Board program, like the one we have in New York City, among other reforms that are desperately needed. So I want to thank my fellow panelists and all of you for indulging me. Thank you very much, and I appreciate this opportunity. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, I'm Tom Petri. I was a member of the House of Representatives, as was said, for some time, and I disagree with the people who just came before me, Eric and Letitia in particular, because I don't think the system is broken if it's producing representatives like the two of you. The system, there's problems with the system, but the important thing is to keep it open so that new people representing different aspects in the community have some chance to participate, and to try to figure out how to reduce barriers to entry into the political system so that people do have an interest and are driven to realize that through a lot of hard work and getting out. It's not just money in politics, it's still shoe leather, and nowadays with the internet sort of smarts, figuring out how to collect web addresses and build networks, and a fellow named Obama kind of figured all that out when he was running against a former senator from New York State for the Democratic nomination a few years ago. I got interested in this subject of campaign finance reform a long time ago because when I first ran for office, it's now some time ago, the term limits, it was before term limits, 1972, for the state senate. And in those days, and then for Congress in 1979 in a special election. And in those days, we had a system which seemed, I thought, worked quite well, which was that if an individual wanted to contribute to a candidate or a political party, they could contribute, I think it was $50 then, or get a deduction against their, like a charitable deduction for a contribution of $100 or a tax credit against their taxes of $50. I don't remember the numbers exactly, but they'd be bigger now if we were to do that. And as a candidate, and I wasn't the only one, everyone would if you're starting early enough, or if you were running for re-election, send letters to your list saying, if you haven't contributed to anyone this year, would you please consider contributing? If you think I've been doing a good job and should run again for $50, you'll get a credit against your taxes in the next election. And it worked very well. And it meant that you were encouraging people to take a little stake in the process. And then the result, I think, as studies have shown, if people do that, it's a little bit like buying a lottery ticket or betting on a horse. You start following the numbers or the races, and then as you get into it, it becomes more and more interesting. And you start learning about the other candidates and more about the issues and so on and so on. It becomes somewhat addictive for some people. So I think sometimes we get too focused on the big money in the big elections at the top, which are very important. But we should also remember that the political process is a huge, broad, diverse one at the municipal level, the county level, town level in my part of the world, in rural New York State, I'm sure, village level, school district level, and all the rest of it. Campaigns are, for most of those jobs, which in many cases are volunteer jobs essentially, can be helped a lot with small contributions. And we sometimes think money is said to be the mother's milk of politics, and there is something to that. But money is a tool, it's not the end of the road. Getting a majority of the votes is the end of the road. And we know, all of us should think of candidates who were very wealthy or backed by a lot of money and really didn't get very many votes at all. Think of John Connally running for president of the United States from Texas in the oil industry years ago. I don't remember how much, it was $50,000 or something like that per vote that he ended up spending in his national campaign. But if you have no money, you never really, very hard, unless you're young and don't have the job or have the free time, so you can campaign all day, every day, and call on every voter and make a good impression. You can do that without money for most elections below the congressional level now, and even some congressional seats. But it takes an enormous amount of effort and time. A small amount of money helps people get the access. More money, it doesn't there's a diminishing return from more money in politics. So the important thing, I think, is sure, worry about the big money. That can be, there's a lot more about big money. I'll tell you one thing, if you're in Congress, and you quoted the member of Congress saying it would, I'd always thought when I first ran for office that political parties existed to support candidates. And I never got any money from political parties that I'm aware to speak of. It turns out the candidates support the political party. I was always assessed $50,000 a campaign to give to the state Republican Party in Wisconsin, a national congressional campaign committee. A friend of mine just was appointed to Ways and Means Committee, you say you're supposed to pay $400,000 to be on the Ways and Means Committee. And it varies according to your committee and whether you're a subcommittee chairman or a full committee chairman. Now, not everyone hits their targets, but it, frankly, where does the average member get that sort of money to contribute to the political process? You get it by having fundraisers in Washington, mainly attended by people of business before your committee. So you're kind of encouraged by the system to work more closely, if you will, with, and it's not to help you personally, financially, but it is regarded as helping you in terms of being a quote-unquote effective member of Congress, or sometimes in getting committee assignments. And that's sort of the system that we have. So if we were to think of passing a bill to prohibit elected officials from contributing to themselves or their political committees to the political process, you think it would be pretty popular with an awful lot of members who have trouble meeting their quotas or their goals. So just a thought, there are probably some flaws with that. But I personally think that the system, because of the evolution that's occurred with the internet, you don't even have to pay money for stamps anymore. All you need to do is get people's email addresses. And the system has never been more open. It's never been more possible for people who care about public service or a particular issue or a combination of issues to be effective in participating in the system. And I would not be discouraged by the fact that participation is sometimes low. If people are really dissatisfied, they participate. They show up at council meetings, they show up at school board meetings, they show up at other meetings, and they will do, in my state, recalls or do other efforts to demonstrate their concern. So the important thing is to maintain, I think, is to maintain as open a system as possible so that if people are relatively satisfied or have other problems in their life that they feel are more important than the things going on in politics, it's not illogical for them not to participate. And I think it's very important to realize that people participate in the political process in a lot of different ways than just in the electoral process. Through their professional associations, like your grandfather, through his union, through people's churches, and 101 different ways. We have a very rich civic culture here in the United States. And the fact that we have an open political process enables that to occur and immeasurably enriches the life for all of us. So I'm just happy to have a chance to be here to urge that we work to improve access to the funding of our political system and not to think it's hopeful because of Supreme Court rulings that there's nothing that can be done about it. You can encourage small amounts of independent contributions by individuals through the tax code or through state legislation, through municipal legislation as you do here, and it really does over time make a difference in bringing new people with energy and ideas and integrity into the system as we've seen here today. So thank you.
Well, we have about 15 minutes left, and while I have questions for the panelists, I'd rather actually listen to you. So does anyone have questions?
Thanks. This is a question primarily for Dr. Mollenkopf and maybe for Councilmember Ulrich. Any thoughts about what's called instant runoff voting?
Along with early voting and easier access to registration, I think instant runoff voting is a great idea because fewer people tend to vote in the runoff elections than the regular elections, and so if they can indicate both the primary and the secondary vote in the election that's drawing the most people out, I think that's the way to go.
I have two questions. One, how do we engage people to give more publicly? Seeing that a lot of people do not know about the matching program, and some are even still skeptical with some of the corruption that has run rampant within New York City politics. So how do we create better efforts and education around public matching so that people are encouraged to give and knowing that their money will not be misused or misappropriated? And two, this is for Dr. Mollenkopf, what is your prospects on online voting in a way to revolutionize and also modern the electoral process, and seeing how, since we are moving into a techie age where a lot of people have more use to computers and more smartphones, I think the best way to go would to move to online voting, which I think we will see a spike in an increase in voter and civic participation.
Does anyone want to?
I want to just add to that. I had an idea that we floated a year ago. Of course, it went in one ear and out the other at the Board of Elections. But I said that people ought to be able to vote at any poll site in New York City, so that if you work in Manhattan but you live in Queens, you should be able to go to a poll site on your lunch break in Manhattan, and the ballot for your particular district should be able to be pulled up, because we have the capability electronically to do that in a secure way. I don't know that we're at the point where we can guarantee the integrity of the electoral process from people's home PCs, from hackers. I mean, we have hackers that are going into government agencies at this point, so I would be weary of that. But allowing more flexibility in how people vote and where they can vote, not that they have to race back to their particular public school or church in order to vote, otherwise they can't vote, they miss their opportunity, I think would be very helpful. And I know that the Board of Elections could do that if they invested the money into the technology to do that, but that's...
Yeah, I just was going to say that Oregon, I think, has a system where people all vote by mail now.
Yes.
And they just like, if you own stock in something, you, as a stockholder, vote for boards of directors and things like that by mail. And in my state and many others, you can vote, go down to the city hall or town hall for about a month before the election and vote. So increasingly, people, there are long lines on election day or whatever. So and so campaigns are gradually working around to the idea of encouraging people to vote, lock their vote in, go it down and vote, and you can check down at the courthouse, see who's already voted, and then if they haven't voted, follow up on that. It's an easy way of I mean, the purpose of a campaign, it comes out to be votes, and if you can look at how many votes you think you'll need to win, and you work every day with volunteers to get them out, this earlier voting really helps the well-organized campaign and a group of volunteers who care about a particular candidate.
Before we move on, I don't want to lose sight of the question about how do we deepen the culture of contributions to political campaigns. And certainly the matching program is a great incentive and makes it possible to spread that further. And I don't really know what the answer is, except I think in the old days, political parties were more like church and less like the highly evolved campaign organizations that they are today. They had a more social dimension to them. Clubhouses were places that people could go and talk about politics and meet their politician and get people to listen to their issues. And they were also places that, to the extent they were a sense of community, then people would feel like to be part of the community they should be contributing, just like you give at Sunday morning in church. And somehow we need to, build a broader culture of that. I would defer to my elected official colleagues who have a lot more experience doing it than I do. But I think there's a lot, I don't know that anybody's really tried to do a contributor engagement campaign the way we do voter registration campaigns, but it would be a good idea.
In regards to civics and expanding the learning curve, there was a discussion earlier, the former panel, with regards to bringing back civics in schools. I totally support that. And I also, yeah, I think we need to bring back Civics 101 to every 5th and 6th grader and extend it to high school. The importance of politics, the importance of civic engagement, the importance of volunteerism. And I also believe at the same time, I've embraced the idea of online town hall meetings where individuals can have an opportunity to speak to their elected officials online.
One thing in that regard, though, people think if a company has a PAC, Political Action Committee, and is making contributions, that money comes from the company, and it doesn't. It comes from the employees of the company. So right now, a lot of companies, they invite office holders or candidates to come in and meet with their employees sometimes to explain the political process and why it's important for their job and their company to participate, and they employ lobbyists or other people too. So I've participated with John Deere has a facility in the district I used to represent. International Paper did, and they had very active campaigns with their workers and middle-level employee, asking them to make contributions to the Political Action Committee. Now, if there was a tax deduction or credit, those sort of campaigns would work even better. And you can think of public employee unions, other groups that would probably get working to encourage their members to, since it wouldn't cost them anything if but it's voluntary, but to contribute to different candidates or a political party.
This is a two-part question related to voter turnout. For Professor Mollenkopf, is there any positive correlation between the number of contributors resident in districts and the voter turnout in those districts? And the second part is for the panel. What do you think of the thought of a small donor matching funds program to provide grants to political parties to engage in voter mobilization?
To your first question, I haven't looked at it systematically, but I'm sure there is a correlation because just given the overall patterns of contributing do pretty much match the contours of the overall patterns of voting when you make maps of them. So I'm sure there's a pretty good contribution. As to making grants to political parties to go out and expand their political, am I understanding the question right, that it was to extending?
Small donor matching for political parties to build their contributor bases and use those grants to mobilize voters.
Well, I think the parties already do a fair amount of that based on the way they're currently financed. And, the Democratic, it's not all, sometimes it's through the parties, and even more it's now through organizations like Catalyst and the Voter Action Network. I don't know if you're familiar with those, but they're basically data sets about voters and their participation history and kind of computer programs about how to access and analyze the data and use it in campaigning on a sort of day-to-day basis. And Catalyst is set up as a private corporation, profit-making. So it makes money from campaigns building up the voter database. And VAN foundations have made VAN available to lots of community organizations to help increase the voter turnout. So I think that there are certain efforts underway that are more or less like that, and I'm not sure we need to do more. I'm not convinced that doing more to build up the party organizations per se would necessarily help the situation all that much, although I guess I would need to think about it a bit more.
Yes, we could get a quick response because we have one more,
Sure,
we'll
just a
have
quick
time for one
response.
more question.
I'm not sure about the party apparatus. I would support giving contributions to nonpartisan organizations to engage in voter participation and registering individuals to vote.
Back in the mid-'90s, there was a campaign led by Citizen Action of New York and then State Senator Eric Schneiderman to amend the New York City charter for full public finance of elections. From the candidate, from an elected's point of view, which is a better, so now we're all talking about the match, and that actually led to the 4-to-1 match and then the 6-to-1 match. From the candidate's point of view, from participation in elections and from voter participation, which would you prefer, full voter-financed elections or a match system? Which would produce better results?
I think the matched program is preferable, at least from the candidate's perspective, because it allows you to engage people in your district and outside of your district and to have them have a stake in your success so that they want you to win almost as much as you want to win. It's also a motivating factor to get people actively involved and engaged in your campaign, because once they've given you $100 or $50, those people are then more likely to hand out your pamphlets at the subway or help you on election day with get out the vote operations, because they don't want to waste that $100 that they gave you. So it's almost like an investment that they've made in you as a candidate and in your success on election day in making sure that you win. A full program, I think, is a disincentive for people to get actively involved in campaigns, and we want people to get actively involved in campaigns.
So I'm not sure. I think I'm leaning towards full participation. I disagree with my colleague. I would like to study it a little bit more and analyze just analyze it a little bit further. But I'm leaning more towards full voter participation.
Okay. We have time probably for one more question. I think this gentleman in the front has had his hand up all the whole. Yeah.
Professor Mollenkopf, you talked about low primary participation, but have you considered that primaries, oftentimes they're unopposed? Second of all, if a person is interested in an issue, typically the Democratic Party and the Republican Party have different stances on the issue, and both multiple candidates within a party would vote the same way. So oftentimes people don't care which of the candidates gets elected, but which of the primary candidates get elected, but in the general population, the general election, they do care. And Mr. Ulrich, why are you Republican?
I'll let you go first.
You would make, my grandmother was a Republican precinct captain in Montgomery County outside of Washington, D.C. And when I was a little kid, she said, you have to watch those Democrats. They vote dead people. You know, you have to match the list with it. Well, if people passed away and they were still on their voter registration list, in those days, such things were done, evidently. Anyway, there needs to be more competition. So the fact that you have many candidates, incumbents, very high rate of incumbency, and so many offices not being challenged and in primaries, and even if they are challenged, perhaps both candidates may have the same positions on issues that are important to residents of the district, that would logically follow from somebody who wanted their votes. I understand all those reasons why people might not care about the most local level, but the whole system does represent, it sits on the grassroots. So we have a big stake in, I think, making sure that I don't know how far I want to take this metaphor of the turf being, raised properly and getting the right amount of water and fertilizer and so forth, so it grows vigorously. But we need to make sure that base level is alive and well. And, so maybe if we had more experience with nonpartisan primaries and more open primaries, we'd get more competition that way. Whatever I think it's something we need to experiment with. We need to try different models. We need to think about different models. But the fact that there's sort of a logic behind the non-participation is something that we shouldn't just accept. We need to figure a way around it. I'm not sure what the answer is.
So when President Obama won, there was a lot of activism all throughout New York. And in fact, I would like to argue that in my former district in Fort Greene, Clinton Hill. That's where the Obama phenomenon started. And it was really grassroots, and it rose up. Unfortunately, it wasn't maintained, and a lot of people became disenchanted. But I think as a result of social media, more and more individuals are recognizing that politics is really local, and that politics has more influence over one's lives than on a national level. And so I just want to thank all of the bloggers and all of the individuals who've participated in social media, because they've made politics more relevant, and particularly on the local level. And so I want to thank them. In regards to Councilmember Ulrich, he embodies the spirit of former Mayor Lindsay. And someone back there is applauding. And so, yeah, so, but he does. I mean, my family supported Lindsay, and, you know, I have this soft spot for Eric Ulrich, and, and I've been to Ozone Park and Howard Beach, and I think I got 10 boats up there, but it's okay.
They love you. We don't have much time, because to answer your question would be very difficult. But I will say this, from a very practical point of view, my family were Democrats. We lived in a Democratic neighborhood, Democratic town, Democratic city. My grandmother in particular is a pioneer in terms of women's rights and feminism, and was always very strong in those issues. And my grandfather was a union member. When I wanted to run for political office, I realized very quickly that in Queens County, the Democratic Party was a machine, and that the machine would never allow a kid from Ozone Park to run for political office. And I said, to hell with this. I'm going to be a Republican, but I'm going to be my own Republican. I'm not going to be a George Bush Republican. I'm going to be an Eric Ulrich Republican. I'm going to be more in line with Mike Bloomberg, for instance. And so, you know, a lot of Republicans are not particularly happy with me. Yesterday on Twitter and Facebook, when I attacked Donald Trump, and when after Donald Trump, they were not happy when I supported marriage equality. They were not happy when I supported the first paid sick leave law. The second one I thought hurt small businesses. So, but I mean, fundamentally, I believe in a limited government. I believe in the party of Lincoln. I think that the Republican Party historically has a very proud tradition of supporting civil rights, for instance. I mean, the Civil Rights Act would not have been passed if it wasn't for Republicans from the Northeast. And there are a lot of, you know, Abraham Lincoln obviously played an important role in ending slavery in our country. So there were a lot of times when the Republican Party was there. And to be quite honest with you, marriage equality would not be the law in New York State if it were not for the 4 Republican state senators that voted for it. Matter of fact, when the Democrats controlled the state Senate, it failed by 6 votes. So it was kind of ironic that a woman's right to choose in New York did not become the law, and if it were not for Senator Roy Goodman from New York, who was really an old Rockefeller Republican in the brand of former Governor Rockefeller. So my point is that the Republican Party, my view of the Republican Party is that it should be the party of the big tent, where we're the party of inclusion, not exclusion. And just to give you an idea, almost every time that I've run for public office, I've had to have a brutal primary where I get vicious mail, vicious attacks from the Tea Party zealots of the Republican Party who hate my guts. And they send out mails saying that I'm a left-wing Rockefeller, evil, you know, turncoat Republican. And then when I have to run in November, the Democrat says he's a right-wing conservative. So it's very, very confusing for the voters in my district that get mail in September and then get mail in October, and they say 2 totally opposite things. But I'm an independent. I'm very proud of, I make decisions based upon what I think is right for my constituents. When you're in public office, by the way, you have to be for all of your constituents, not just the people who are from your political party or the people who voted for you, the people who gave you money. You have to be for all the people, even the people that hate your guts, that didn't vote for you, that will never support you. You have to represent those people too. When you took that oath, you said you wanted to represent all the people in your district or in the city, not just the people that you agree with or the people that you like. And I think that's part of the problem today, is that people only want to be there for the people that put them in office, not realizing that we have to be for all the people, even the people that we fundamentally disagree with. So I'm Republican light. You know, so, but,
Okay.
Thank
Well,
you.
although I said that was the last question, I'm giving an indulgence to our conference organizer, Matt Sollers, to ask a question.
Hello, I'm the press secretary at the Campaign Finance Board. A quick question for Councilmember Ulrich. As the only panelist right now who's run for office under the Campaign Finance Board system and for another office in an unlimited system, basically, for state office, could you just contrast the two
yes.
experiences?
I ran for state senate in 2012. I lost a number of reasons. I don't want to bore you. You can buy the book one day. The difference was night and day. I testified at the Moreland Commission, actually, at the first hearing when the U.S. attorneys were Loretta Lynch at the time and Preet testified. I testified after them in favor of campaign finance reform in New York State and saying that we should have a matching fund program at the state level. And I used my own experience running for state senate, getting $10,000 checks from people who I never heard of, never met, in the mail because they were more concerned with the balance of power in Albany than they were in me as a particular candidate. It wasn't that they loved me or agreed with me or thought that I was so wonderful. It's that they were concerned that the Republicans might lose the state senate, and it's a battleground seat in Queens. It was held by a Republican for many years. It recently is held by a Democrat. And someone who I'm friends with, it's very hard to run against people you like, by the way. We actually attend the same church, and if you look at his donors and my donors, a lot of them are the same. We just happen to be from the same neighborhood. He's a great guy. But anyway, I didn't vote for him. That was, I voted, that was, I actually joked with him. I said, even though he's a Democrat, I said, this is the first time that I have not voted for you. It's because I was running against him. But the point is that we got these checks from real estate interests and from people who had their own agenda, and I didn't know that. I don't know that much about the Erstat law. I don't know much about, some of the more contentious issues that, they've been fighting in Albany about for the past 30 years. But that was terribly important to them, and they were financing my campaign. And the level of engagement with smaller donors really didn't exist in that campaign because I didn't need them. When you get $10,000 checks, 4 or 5 at a clip, you don't have to have hot dog barbecues for $50 a head. I mean, we had them anyway, but because they were fun. But running for state office and running for city office in the campaign finance program is a big difference. And you can see the disconnect and why people in Albany are getting into so much trouble and why they are so unresponsive to the needs of their constituents. Because quite frankly, they're representing gerrymandered districts where they pick the voters don't pick them. And their campaigns are financed every 2 years by several zip codes in Manhattan, by people on the left and the right of the political spectrum who have a stake not in their success but in their own financial interests and the balance of power in Albany. And I said that publicly on the record. People who gave me money were not happy. Too bad for them. When you give me money, that doesn't mean that you get to control what comes out of my mouth. I say what I think is right. I have to serve my constituents. My constituents are the ones that hired me. If they think that I sold them out for powerful special interest groups or people who write big checks, they're going to vote for somebody else. At the end of the day, that's what this is all about, is representing the voters in our district and being responsive to them. The system in Albany that allows for $50,000 contributions to the governor and $10,000 contributions to state senators really widens the gap between the elected officials and the people that they represent, because they're so concerned with pleasing the big donors, because they know that in a year and a half or 2 years they have to run for re-election and beg them for more money, that they're spending less time helping their constituents. That's not what this is supposed to be all about. So I hope that you can take that from this. And I benefited from that loophole, but it's not a good loophole, and it's not something that should exist in the law, and I would support overturning it or reforming it, because I experienced firsthand what happens in the cycle. It's a vicious cycle that the campaign finance at the state level perpetuates, and it contributes in large measure to the reason why you have so much corruption in Albany.
Well, thank you, everyone.